I remember that moment like it was yesterday. The cafe smelled faintly of burnt espresso and ambition. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, but nothing could warm the chill in the pit of my stomach. Across from me sat Damien, the self-proclaimed expert, the man who thought he had life figured out, and apparently, my life mapped out too. Honestly, just go back to your small life, he said, leaning back with that condescending smirk I'd come to despise. You're never going to make it here. You're not cut out for this kind of opportunity. Those words stung not just because of their arrogance, but because of how matter-of-factly he delivered them, as if I had been born incapable of anything beyond mediocrity. My coffee trembled slightly in my hand. My jaw tightened. He didn't even glance at my notes or the prototype I had spent months perfecting. No curiosity, no consideration, just dismissal. I should have walked away, maybe even laughed it off, but something inside me sparked not anger, not despair, but a cold, patient resolve. This wasn't at the end of my story. It was the beginning of a plan that would consume the next decade of my life. At the time, I was 26, working as a junior product designer at a small firm. I had ideas, ambition, and drive, but not the connections or the capital to turn my concepts into reality. Damien, on the other hand, had influence, wealth, and confidence, the kind of confidence that masks insecurity but commands obedience. He thought I was just another insignificant person to brush aside. I would prove him wrong. I left that cafe with my head high, even though my heart throbbed with both humiliation and determination. That day, the world saw a calm exterior. Inside, I was already calculating, planning, visualizing a future where no one could ever tell me I wasn't enough again. Back at my apartment, I spread out all my sketches and plans across the small dining table that doubled as my workspace. Every detail mattered, every curve, every color, every metric of the prototype. But more than that, I focused on the path. The strategy wasn't just about creating something people wanted, it was about creating a story, a brand, and eventually, a presence so undeniable that no one could ignore it. I worked late into the night, fueled by instant coffee and pure determination. I researched markets, investors, and competitors. I analyzed their failures and successes, learning everything I could about turning a small idea into a large-scale empire. The words Damien had spoken echoed in my mind, not as an insult, but as a challenge. They were my spark, turned into months. I took every opportunity to refine my designs, test prototypes, and gather feedback from anyone who would listen. My savings were small, but I invested them wisely, first in materials, then in technology, and eventually in branding. I knew that presentation mattered as much as product quality. A mediocre idea in a brilliant package often succeeds faster than a brilliant idea in a sloppy one. I also built connections, quietly, behind the scenes. I attended small networking events, asked questions, listened more than I spoke, and studied the patterns of people who had already succeeded. I realized quickly that people underestimate the power of observation. Every laugh, every nod, every subtle gesture could teach you something invaluable about influence, persuasion, and opportunity. By the end of that year, I had a fully functional prototype, a brand identity, and a modest but growing social media following. The little app I had created was still small, but it had begun generating real traction. Friends noticed. Some skeptics softened. But Damien? He hadn't heard a thing, and I liked it that way. The turning point came unexpectedly. I had submitted my project to a local innovation competition mostly for feedback, not expecting to win. But when I got the call that I had been selected as a finalist, I felt a flicker of hope. Then came the news. I had won the grand prize, a small seed fund, and mentorship from some of the city's top entrepreneurs. The irony wasn't he lost on me my ideas, dismissed by Damien, were now officially recognized by those he would never consider my peers. But recognition alone wasn't enough. I still had to scale. I had to take the project from a modest success to a powerhouse brand. I studied every billboard campaign in the city, every viral marketing case study, and every example of people who had leveraged bold moves to capture attention. I realized that the key wasn't just to succeed quietly, but to make a statement so visible, so undeniable, that the people who had doubted me had no choice but to see it. The idea struck me late one night. A billboard, a massive, eye-catching, high-traffic billboard, strategically placed where anyone in Damien S. Circle would see it. My face, my brand, my message. It would be a public declaration that I had arrived, but it had to be perfect. The design, the message, the timing, all of it, had to scream success without saying a word. Months of planning followed. I secured investors, negotiated the billboard placement, and launched a carefully orchestrated marketing campaign. Everything had to align: social media buzz, local press coverage, and a timing that coincided with a major industry event where Damien would be present. Finally, the day came. As dawn broke, the billboard lit up the skyline. There I was, smiling confidently, holding the product that had once been dismissed, with a tagline that read, "Dreams don't wait. Neither should you." The city awoke to it. People stopped to take pictures, news outlets covered it, and social media went wild. That evening, Damien finally saw it. He was attending a networking event downtown, right in the line of sight of the massive billboard. His expression shifted in real time from casual confidence to stunned disbelief. Mouth slightly open, eyes wide, his arrogance replaced by realization. The man who had told me to go back to my small life now had no words left. And that S when I smiled, quietly, knowing that every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt and struggle had led to this undeniable truth. He could tell me what I couldn't do, but he could never dictate what I would do. That billboard wasn't just an advertisement. It was a declaration, a warning, and a promise to myself, to every skeptic, and most importantly, to anyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. After that first billboard went live, everything changed fast. Not just for me, but for the perception of my work, my ambition, and my very identity. People began calling, investors reached out, and media outlets wanted interviews. The small, overlooked product I had painstakingly built in my tiny apartment was now on the radar of people who had previously ignored me. But the exhilaration came with a new challenge: scaling quickly without losing control. Overnight, I went from a solo creator to the head of a rapidly growing brand. I had to hire staff, establish logistics, manage customer service, and maintain the quality that had earned me early recognition. Every decision mattered. Every misstep could undo months of careful planning. I brought in a team of like-minded individuals, ambitious, sharp, and willing to push limits. Many were young professionals who had been told the same things I had: "You will never make it." Their hunger mirrored my own, and I realized that surrounding myself with people who understood struggle and ambition was more valuable than any investor. We worked tirelessly. Early mornings turned into late nights. Board meetings blended into strategy sessions that ran past midnight. We experimented with new designs, tested market strategies, and optimized logistics. Each success fueled the next, and each failure became a lesson, a stepping stone toward refining our vision. The buzz from the first billboard didn't fade. In fact, it snowballed. Local news ran segments about the young entrepreneur who had taken the city by storm. Social media platforms featured viral posts of my product in the hands of influencers and ordinary users alike. Every feature, every mention, was another affirmation that I was moving in the right direction. Then came the big break, a chance to present at the city's largest tech and innovation summit. This was Damien S. territory. He was a keynote speaker, surrounded by the very network that had once sneered at my potential. I almost hesitated to go. Part of me considered walking away to avoid the confrontation, but I knew this was the opportunity to truly measure the distance between where I had been and where I had arrived. The day of the summit, I arrived early, checking every detail, rehearsing every word. The room buzzed with energy, with industry veterans, investors, and media professionals mingling around me. When my turn came, I stepped onto the stage with calm confidence, my prototype displayed. On the massive screen behind me, I spoke clearly, passionately, and without arrogance. I shared the story of building my product from scratch, of rejection, struggle, and relentless perseverance. I didn't mention Damien by name, but I could feel the unspoken challenge in the air. People were leaning forward, engaged, captivated not by the drama, but by the authenticity, creativity, and meticulous execution of my work. By the time I finished, the room erupted in applause. Investors approached, eager to collaborate. Media requests were nonstop. And then I saw Damien, standing at the back of the hall, his face pale, jaw tight, eyes wide. He had underestimated me once. Now, he was witnessing the tangible proof of my rise. But I wasn't done. I had bigger plans. I wanted my brand, my product, my vision to not just exist, but to dominate the conversation in our city, and eventually, the nation. I began exploring national advertising campaigns, strategic partnerships, and collaborations with top-tier influencers. Every billboard, every campaign, every press feature was carefully orchestrated to elevate the brand and reinforce my presence. The second billboard went up at the busiest intersection in the city. It was larger, brighter, and impossible to ignore. My face, smiling confidently alongside the tagline, "Small dreams can move mountains," dominated the skyline. The reactions were immediate. People stopped, stared, photographed it, and shared it online. The buzz was electric. News outlets ran features, and social media accounts amplified the message. And Damien? I heard through industry channels that he had noticed it. Friends whispered about his disbelief. Colleagues teased him for underestimating someone he once dismissed. I didn't gloat, I let the work speak. Let him stew in the reality that the small life he had mocked had become a life commanding attention, influence, and respect. Meanwhile, I continued expanding the business. I hired logistics experts, marketing specialists, and brand strategists. We launched new products, each more innovative than the last. Sales soared, not just because of clever advertising, but because the products were genuinely useful, well-designed, and reflective of a philosophy that valued quality over shortcuts. The team and I celebrated every milestone, but we didn't stop. We set ambitious goals, sometimes frighteningly so. We weren't just trying to grow. We were aiming to redefine the industry standard. Our strategy wasn't based on luck. It was based on relentless observation, calculated risk, and a refusal to accept the limitations others had imposed on us. The most satisfying moments, though, weren't the boardroom victories or the media accolades. They were the everyday wins. Watching a customer share how our product changed their routine, seeing a team member grow into a leadership role, or receiving messages from people inspired by my story that was real power. Influence born from impact, not intimidation, was far more rewarding than any victory over a critic. Damien's shadow loomed occasionally, a reminder of where I had started. But over time, he became less of a presence and more of a benchmark. He represented the doubt, the disbelief, and the dismissive attitude that fueled my determination. Every billboard, every campaign, every new success was a quiet but undeniable message. The boy he told to go back had arrived, and on his own terms. By the end of the second year, our brand was not just recognized locally, it was a contender on a national scale. Partnerships with major retailers, strategic media features, and viral campaigns positioned us as innovators and leaders. I had transformed the narrative, not through confrontation, but through consistent action, thoughtful strategy, and relentless execution. And then came the idea that would define this chapter of my rise, a national billboard campaign timed to coincide with the biggest annual tech convention in the country. This wasn't just marketing, it was storytelling. My face, my message, my brand, every element carefully crafted to show that persistence, creativity, and vision could overcome even the most dismissive critics. When the campaign launched, it dominated the skyline in multiple major cities. Screens, billboards, and media outlets featured our brand. The story of the once dismissed young entrepreneur captured the imagination of people across the country. Damien finally had no choice but to acknowledge the reality. I wasn't just successful. I had become a symbol, a proof that being underestimated is never the end, only a beginning. That night, looking out from my office at the city lights, I reflected on how far I had come. From the cafe where I was told to return to a small life, to commanding national attention with a $1 billion campaign, it had been a journey of strategy, resilience, and patience. I had transformed doubt into fuel, humiliation into ambition, and dismissal into dominance. And as I looked out over the skyline, I knew Damien and everyone who had ever underestimated me was seeing it too. The face they thought they could ignore was now impossible to forget. Success felt intoxicating, but it also brought a new kind of pressure. As my brand grew, so did the competition. Companies that had once ignored me now scrutinized every move I made. Investors demanded faster growth, media coverage heightened expectations, and Damien, well, he was no longer a distant annoyance, he had become a symbol of the doubts I needed to decisively silence. It started subtly. One day, I received an anonymous email filled with insider details about a rival product launching the same week as our national Billboard campaign. The email hinted at leaks, bad press, and potential legal hurdles. Someone wanted to see us stumble. I didn't panic, I analyzed it. I traced the source, double-checked our compliance, and fortified every weak point. This was the new reality. Success attracts challenges, and only those prepared for them survive. At the same time, the team faced growing pains. Employees were burning out, deadlines were tighter, and mistakes became costlier. I spent nights strategizing workflow, delegating authority, and motivating a team that now numbered over 50 people. Leadership was no longer about vision alone. It was about execution under pressure, and the pressure was relentless. The industry summit approached a global event, broadcasted internationally, where innovators showcased their work. This was the moment I had been waiting for, not just to present, but to make a statement. Damien would be there, along with other critics who had dismissed my ideas. This was the perfect stage for my next move. Weeks leading up to the summit were a whirlwind. I fine-tuned our presentation, rehearsed every speech, and worked with my marketing team to ensure a flawless debut. We also prepared a live demonstration of our latest product, a sleek, groundbreaking design that combined technology, style, and functionality. It wasn't just about impressing the audience. It was about leaving no doubt that our vision had surpassed expectations. The night before the summit, I barely slept. I walked through every detail in my mind, imagining Damien's expression, imagining the headlines, imagining the faces of skeptics seeing my work on the largest stage yet. I wasn't fueled by revenge anymore. It was a matter of proving to myself that the countless nights of sacrifice had been worth it. When the day came, the venue was massive. Thousands of attendees filled the seat, media crews lined the aisles, and cameras broadcasted every angle. Backstage, I could feel the tension in the air. Executives and competitors whispered, analysts took notes, and Damien stood off to the side, his posture tense. He was witnessing a level of growth he could neither predict nor control. My turn arrived. The spotlight hit, and I stepped onto the stage. The first few seconds were nerve-wracking, but then I reminded myself, I had prepared for this moment for years. I began with the story, the cafe, the dismissive words, the billboard. I didn't call out Damien explicitly, but everyone understood. The narrative resonated because it was authentic, raw, and relatable. People leaned in, captivated by the journey from doubt to dominance. Then came the demonstration. The product performed flawlessly, exceeding even the most optimistic expectations. Questions from the audience were sharp, but my answers were precise, backed by data, testing results, and real-world performance metrics. By the end, the applause was deafening. Media crews scrambled to get interviews. Investors approached with serious offers, and Damien, he was frozen in place, a witness to the undeniable reality of my ascent. But this summit wasn't just about public validation, it was about strategic positioning. After the event, I met with key partners and investors who could help us expand globally. We negotiated distribution deals, technology partnerships, and marketing alliances that positioned our brand as an emerging leader in the industry. Every handshake, every contract signed, solidified the empire I was building. Meanwhile, I maintained a quiet campaign in the background. Every new billboard, social media post, and press feature was strategically timed to coincide with events where our rivals and Damien would notice. I wasn't just succeeding. I was orchestrating a story, carefully controlling the narrative, proving that determination, intelligence, and meticulous planning outweigh arrogance and doubt. The pinnacle of this strategy came when our largest billboard yet went live, positioned directly outside Damien S. office building. It was impossible to miss. My face, smiling confidently, next to the tagline, "From small beginnings come big realities." The campaign went viral, social media exploded, and news outlets picked up the story immediately. Damien had no escape, no way to ignore the reality unfolding above him. The fallout was immediate. Colleagues whispered, investors gossiped, and the media speculated on the rivalry. But I remained calm. I didn't need to celebrate or gloat. The work itself, the visible proof of success, spoke louder than any words ever could. Damien's dismissive smirk was replaced with disbelief, a silent acknowledgement of the journey he had underestimated. While the attention was thrilling, the real satisfaction came from the transformation I had undergone. I wasn't the same person who had been told to go back to a small life. Every sacrifice, every late night, every risk had refined me, shaped me into a leader capable of navigating challenges, building an empire, and influencing an industry. However, the path wasn't without personal cost. Relationships had suffered, friends who couldn't match my pace drifted away. The pressure sometimes felt overwhelming, but I kept my focus, driven by the clear vision of where I wanted to go and what I had to prove, not just to Damien, but to myself. As the year closed, our brand had not only dominated local markets, but had expanded nationally. Sales were growing exponentially, media attention was consistent, and investor confidence was high. Damien, once so vocal in his doubts, had become a cautionary tale among his peers, a reminder that underestimating someone's determination can have spectacular consequences. I knew the next stage would require even bolder moves: global expansion, technological innovation, and ultimately, a statement so undeniable that it would permanently etch my success in public consciousness. But for now, I allowed myself a brief moment of satisfaction. The climb had been steep, the challenges relentless, but I had proven that a person's potential is never defined by the doubts of others. And as I stood on the rooftop of our headquarters, looking out at the city skyline dotted with our billboards, I smiled quietly. The journey wasn't over, but every obstacle, every critic, and every dismissive word had become part of the foundation for something much greater. Damien's words, once a dagger to my confidence, were now fuel for my relentless ascent. With national recognition under my belt, it was time to face the final act, the moment I had been building toward for years. Damien had become the embodiment of everything I had once feared: arrogance, dismissal, and the cruel certainty that he knew better than everyone else. But now, the balance had shifted. I was no longer the underestimated outsider. I was a force commanding attention, respect, and influence. The opportunity came sooner than expected. An industry gala was announced, the kind of high-profile event Damien loved, filled with executives, investors, and media representatives. Invitations were exclusive, and the guest list was meticulously curated. Naturally, Damien assumed his presence would overshadow any newcomer. He had no idea I would not just attend, I would dominate the narrative. In the weeks leading up to the gala, I prepared meticulously. Every detail mattered: the suit, the demeanor, the talking points, the alliances. I didn't want to simply attend. I wanted to make a statement that could not be ignored. My team worked behind the scenes to coordinate media coverage, positioning me for maximum visibility. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense, it was about asserting the undeniable truth of achievement, strategy, and perseverance. On the night of the gala, the venue gleamed with opulence. Crystal chandeliers reflected golden light across polished marble floors. Arrived in luxury cars, dressed to impress. The air buzzed with conversation about upcoming ventures, partnerships, and industry gossip. Damien, predictably, exuded confidence, greeting influential figures with his signature smirk, Completely unaware of the storm about to enter the room, I arrived quietly, stepping from my sleek car into the crisp evening air. Unlike Damien, I didn't need to announce my presence with flamboyance. My reputation had already done that for me. As I walked through the grand entrance, whispers rippled through the crowd, faces turned, cameras snapped, and I could see recognition in the eyes of industry leaders who had followed my journey. And then I saw him, Damien, standing near the center of the room, laughing at something one of his colleagues had said. I could feel the tension in his posture, the subtle tightening of his jaw as he noticed people leaning in to greet me with respect and admiration. The room had shifted. I wasn't just another attendee. I was a figure commanding attention. I approached with calm confidence, smiling politely as I exchanged greetings. Every handshake, every nod was deliberate. I allowed the subtle glances, the murmured acknowledgments, and the occasional stifled gasp to reinforce my presence. Damien's eyes followed me, a flicker of unease betraying the composure he tried to maintain. Moments later, the event. Organizers called everyone to gather for a group photo. Cameras clicked, flashes illuminated the room, and journalists snapped every angle. The organizers, aware of my impact on the industry, deliberately placed me front and center. Damien, for the first time in years, found himself in the background, forced to acknowledge the reality he had once dismissed. After the photos, the gala shifted to speeches. Industry leaders spoke of innovation, collaboration, and vision. When it was my turn, I approached the stage with poise. Silence fell over the room, the air thick with anticipation. I didn't begin with confrontation. I began with story. I recounted my journey, small beginnings, dismissal, relentless work, and eventual national recognition. I spoke not of personal revenge, but of lessons learned, challenges overcome, and the power of perseverance. The audience listened, captivated. Every word resonated, not just with the underdogs in the room, but with executives, investors, and media personnel who understood the significance of my rise. And then, as if scripted by fate, Damien's expression shifted from amusement to disbelief. His smirk vanished, replaced by a subtle tightening around his eyes, a silent acknowledgement that I had transformed, that I had surpassed every expectation he had ever imposed on me. After my speech, media crews surrounded me for interviews. Journalists asked about strategy, growth, and vision. Investors inquired about partnerships and expansion. And Damien, he lingered at the edge of the crowd, watching as the narrative unfolded around him. He had no words, no immediate rebuttal, just the stark reality of my success reflected in every interaction I had that night. The evening culminated in an announcement, a recognition of industry innovators, those who had transformed their fields with creativity and leadership. When my name was called, the applause was deafening. Cameras captured my face alongside the tagline, Vision, Perseverance, Impact. Damien could no longer ignore the fact that the small life he had mocked had become a life commanding global attention. Later, as the gala wound down, I found myself in a quiet moment overlooking the city skyline from the balcony. I reflected on the journey, the sleepless nights, the doubts, the betrayals, and the relentless work that had brought me here. Victory wasn't about humiliation or one-upping Damien. It was about proving to myself and the world that determination, strategy, and resilience could overcome even the most dismissive critics. When I returned inside, Damien approached, finally breaking his silence. His voice was measured but tense. I didn't expect this, he admitted, his pride bruised. You've accomplished a lot. I smiled politely. Thank you. It has been a journey of persistence, learning, and focus. I am glad you can see the result. There was a pause. Then he nodded, a reluctant acknowledgement of reality. No snide remarks, no dismissive words, just recognition. It wasn't personal triumph over him, it was the quiet satisfaction of having reached a level of success that left no room for doubt. That night, I returned home, exhausted but fulfilled. The gala had been more than an event, it had been a culmination of years of work, strategy, and unrelenting focus. Damien's words, once sharp and belittling, had lost their power. They were now a distant echo, overshadowed by the tangible reality of achievement. As I looked at the city lights from my office, I realized something profound. True success isn't measured by the defeat of others, but by the creation of something lasting, impactful, and undeniable. Damien had been a catalyst, but the journey had been mine alone. And in that quiet moment, I made a vow. The next stage of growth would not just cement my position, it would redefine the standard for what was possible when someone refused to be underestimated. The ascent was far from over. The weeks following the gala were a whirlwind. Media outlets ran feature stories about my rise, social media buzzed with discussions about my innovative strategies, and investors scrambled to align themselves with my vision. I wasn't just known anymore, I was unavoidable. Every billboard, every interview, every feature amplified the narrative of perseverance and success, transforming what once had been humiliation into undeniable triumph. But for me, the crowning achievement wasn't the headlines or accolades. It was the Billboard campaign, a single, billion-dollar billboard towering in the heart of the city, impossible to ignore. I had worked in secret for months, coordinating with advertisers, city planners, and media outlets. The message was simple, yet devastating in its clarity. From small life to global impact. My face graced the billboard, confident and calm, radiating the success that had once been dismissed as impossible. The first day it went live, the city practically stopped. Commuters slowed their cars to get a glimpse. Pedestrians paused mid-step, pointing upward. Media crews flocked to capture the story. And Damien, he finally saw it. He called me immediately, voice tight and incredulous. "Alex, is that really you?" he asked, disbelief edging every word. "It's me," I said calmly. "Exactly as you see. You did this?" His voice was shaking now, and there was an uncharacteristic humility underneath the anger. How is this even possible?" I smiled faintly. Years of work, careful planning, and a refusal to let someone else define my life. You told me to go back to a small life, and now, the world sees exactly what I've built from that small life. There was a pause. I could hear him swallowing, realizing the full weight of my words. "I underestimated you," he admitted quietly. "I had no idea. And that is the point," I replied. "Doubt can be a powerful motivator, but only if you don't to let it stop you. You dismissed me. That dismissal lit a fire that carried me far beyond what you imagined. It wasn't a personal revenge in the petty sense anymore." Damien's shock, his silent acknowledgement of my growth, was simply a mirror reflecting my own journey. Every challenge, every setback, every long night of effort had led to this moment. The billboard wasn't just a statement to him, it was a declaration to the world, to anyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. The media coverage exploded. Morning shows, business channels, online news portals all highlighted the story. Commentators marveled at how someone had turned dismissal into motivation, small beginnings into global recognition. Social media campaigns went viral. Within hours, the hashtag #SmallLifeBigImpact trended nationally. My name was everywhere, and I watched it all quietly, knowing that while public recognition was thrilling, the real victory was in what I had built, not just what others saw. The billboard became more than just an image, it became a symbol. Schools invited me to speak, entrepreneurs reached out for advice, and young professionals shared their stories of how my journey inspired them to keep going despite doubt. I realized that my story had grown beyond Damien, beyond rivalry. It had become a beacon for resilience, ambition, and perseverance. Meanwhile, Damien's influence waned. He had spent years resting on inherited privilege and dismissing talent, believing that appearances were everything. Now he faced a stark reality. A self-made success had eclipsed his reputation, and there was no turning back. Colleagues who had once deferred to him now sought my guidance. Investors that had doubted me came seeking partnerships. Damien was left scrambling, watching the success he had ignored, powerless to alter it. Despite the satisfaction, I remained grounded. Triumph wasn't about flaunting wealth or humiliating others, it was about creating opportunities, inspiring change, and proving that persistence and focus can reshape any narrative. I continued building my brand, expanding operations internationally, and mentoring emerging entrepreneurs who reminded me of the person I had been years ago, uncertain, underestimated, and determined to prove that small beginnings could lead to monumental outcomes. One morning, a news crew approached me for an exclusive interview. The anchor asked the question that had become the crux of my story. Alex, after everything, what does this billboard represent to you? I looked up at the skyline, where dozens of other billboards carried my message. It is not about me, I said. It is about everyone who's ever been told they are not enough. This is proof that you define your limits, not anyone else. That every setback can be transformed into fuel. That small beginnings can create massive impact if you have the courage to keep going. The footage aired globally, reinforcing the message. And later that day, I received a call from Damien. He didn't yell, he didn't argue. He simply said, "You win, Alex. You've built something incredible." I didn't gloat. I simply nodded. "Thank you," I said. "I hope you learn from it too. Everyone deserves a chance to rise." That moment encapsulated the journey, the years of work, the obstacles, the disbelief from others, and the relentless focus on building something bigger than myself. The billboard was just a symbol, a visible culmination of invisible effort, sacrifices, and persistence. But it also marked the beginning of a new phase, using the platform to inspire, to innovate, and to create opportunities for others who, like me once, were told they weren't enough. By the end of the year, my brand had become a household name. Partnerships extended globally, revenue soared, and the Billboard campaign was replicated in multiple cities. My story was no longer just a personal triumph. It had become a movement. Young entrepreneurs, professionals, and students reached out to share how my journey had changed their perspective, motivated them to take risks and believe in themselves. And through it all, I remembered the words Damien had once said, "Go back to your small life." Those words had once cut deep, but now they fueled every decision, every late night, every strategy. What had been intended as an insult had transformed into a catalyst for unimaginable growth. As I looked up at the original billboard from my office window, I allowed myself a small smile. The journey was far from over. New challenges, new competitors, and new opportunities awaited. But for the first time, I knew this truth. Nothing, neither doubt, nor dismissal, nor arrogance from others could limit a person determined to rise. The billboard wasn't just a statement to Damien or to the doubters. It was a statement to the world that small lives could lead to big impact, that persistence and courage could rewrite destiny, and that no one should ever underestimate what a determined individual could achieve. And with that, I embraced the next chapter of growth, fully aware that the legacy I had built would inspire countless others to defy expectations, to rise above doubt, and to see that even the smallest life has the potential to leave an indelible mark on the world.